He wrapped his hands around hers, teaching the woman who saved his life how to blow a man's chest wide open. 3 weeks ago, she was treating headaches at a free clinic, and now she's standing in a mafia compound's basement, dumping magazines into paper targets. The line between civilian and criminal vanishes the second she realizes she actually likes the recoil and that she'll murder anyone who comes near his little girl. Boston is drowning in a blizzard tonight. Out in the freezing dark, Serafina drags a dying man from the snow. 16 bullets in his chest, yet his eyes still burn with a desperate fire. Any sane soul would keep walking. Not her. She pulls him into the warmth, digs the lead out, and forces his heart to beat again. But here is the tragic twist: that bleeding man is Lucian Moretti, Boston's syndicate king. Saving his life just made her a fragile piece on a blood-soaked chessboard. Earlier, she was grinding a 16-hour shift at a rundown clinic, fighting a losing battle. Maybe that is the hardest lesson we all have to learn, accepting that you simply cannot save everyone, no matter how much it aches. Settle in. Tonight, you and I are going to unpack this tragedy together. She steps out of the clinic into the biting wind, totally drained. A cheap wool coat over her scrubs is her only armor against the storm. The exhaustion is deep in her bones. Outside, Boston feels like the end of the world. The blizzard has been raging since noon, burying the harbor district under massive snowdrifts. Cars sit abandoned, and the streetlights flicker in the ice. Her apartment is 6 blocks away, but it feels like an endless marathon. She is freezing, pushing through the heavy snow, when a sound cuts through the howling wind. A low, ragged groan. It barely sounds human, but a true healer never really clocks out. Her medical instinct takes over, and she stops dead in her tracks. Sometimes life forces you to pause exactly when all you want to do is keep moving, and that single pause changes everything. She turns slowly, and there it is. The blood looks pitch black against the snow. Common sense screams at her to keep walking. This is the harbor district, where playing the hero usually gets you killed, but our girl never makes the smart choice. She follows the trail and finds a man half buried in the ice, wearing a shredded designer suit. His chest is completely ruined by catastrophic bullet wounds. The chilling part? His eyes are wide open and completely aware. He whispers a desperate plea: no police. A normal person would run. But Serafina drops to her knees, her training overriding the sheer panic, and reaches for his throat. Life teaches us that real courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to step forward while your heart is pounding out of your chest. His pulse is fading fast. She tells him he needs a hospital. Suddenly his hand shoots out, gripping her wrist with terrifying strength. He refuses the cops. She really looks at him now. The ruined suit, the dark ink, the undeniable predator look in his eyes. This man is pure danger. She says she cannot move him alone. He just mutters for her to leave him. But our girl makes the choice that rewrites her life. She tells him her place is 2 blocks away. If he can walk, she can help. But if he dies, she is dragging his corpse to the station. He smirks at that. Hoisting him up takes 5 agonizing minutes. He is solid muscle, and every brutal step leaves a heavy blood trail in the blinding snow. Here is a simple truth: the heaviest burdens we carry are usually the ones we volunteer to pick up. Serafina is dragging this absolute unit of a man through a howling blizzard. Her boots are sliding on the ice, her lungs burning, but he is dead silent. Not a single groan escapes him, even when they wipe out in a snowdrift. Honestly, sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and push through the pain to survive. They finally crash into her basement apartment, hidden under a noisy laundromat, rusty pipes, a floor mattress, and faint radio jazz. She looks at this mystery man slumped against her wall, bleeding out. She asks for his name. He asks if it even matters. She holds his gaze and says she wants to know the name of the man she is about to watch die. He hits her with an icy gray stare. And for the first time tonight, a spark of humanity flickers in those cold eyes. He drops the name softly: Lucian. Serafina grabs her shears and slices his ruined shirt away. Underneath is a literal war zone, 16 bullet holes, 16 jagged pieces of lead buried in this man, and he is still awake, sizing her up like a threat. It goes to show, you never really know how resilient someone is until they are pushed to the brink. She boils water, grabs her basic emergency kit, and prepares to dig. She warns him it will hurt. He stares blankly, replying that everything hurts. The first bullet pops out easily, hitting a metal bowl. But the next ones are a nightmare. By the 5th slug, her hands are violently shaking. Lucian just grunts, ordering her to keep going. She whispers that she is a nurse, not a surgeon. He replies that she is all he has. The flat, resigned way he speaks gives you total chills. It is pure desperation keeping her hands steady now. Hours blur into the heavy metallic clink of lead hitting a blood-stained bowl. Through the first 9 bullets, Lucian is a stone wall. Not a single sound. But right around bullet 10, that thick armor finally cracks. In a feverish whisper, he talks about a 6-year-old girl named Vivian. He says if he does not make it through the night, someone has to find her and tell her he really tried. Funny how that works. Even the most terrifying monsters have that one soft spot they would die for. Serafina tells him to tell her himself, and keeps digging. Bullet 16 is the nightmare, wedged right against his heart. 20 agonizing minutes later, she pulls it free and collapses. But Lucian goes completely still. His eyes fall shut. His chest stops moving entirely. The silence in that tiny room is suddenly deafening. Serafina refuses to let this man fade away. After all that raw suffering, panic takes the wheel. She throws her weight over him, slamming her palms down against his battered chest. 1, 2, 3, then 10, then 11. Tears are pouring down her face now, begging this stubborn giant to just take a single breath. You know, sometimes the only difference between a bitter tragedy and a miracle is refusing to quit when the odds say you should. At 30 brutal compressions, she feels a sudden shudder. He gasps hard. Those icy gray eyes snap wide open, totally shocked to still be in the land of the living. She whispers a quiet welcome back before passing out on the floor. When morning breaks, his pulse is rock solid. Now you and I are going to watch this unfold together. Against every medical odd, this guy is actually holding on. Serafina stands in her kitchen, shaking hands, holding a warm mug, staring at the sleeping giant in her apartment. You do not catch 16 bullets by living a quiet life. For 3 heavy days, the snow falls outside while he remains totally unconscious. She pulls exhausting shifts at the clinic, drags herself home, changes his bandages, and collapses. A smarter person would have called the police. Instead, she puts on some low jazz and reads old cowboy novels out loud. It just goes to show, sometimes the wildest risks we take reveal exactly who we really are. I swear, whenever the story hits a good part, the heavy rhythm of his breathing actually changes. Night 4 finally arrives. She is in the middle of a chapter when his eyes suddenly snap open. His voice is totally steady as he points out she is still here. Where else would I be? She shoots back. He warns her that smart people usually run from men like him. She just sighs, guessing she is not that smart. Leaning in to check his fever, she mutters that a simple thank you might be nice. He looks at her like she spoke a foreign language. You can feel it. This is a guy who never thanks anyone. He ignores her remark, scanning her tired face in the freezing room. He asks if she lives alone. She admits she grinds 6 days a week at the free clinic. Listen, everyone desperately needs a safe harbor in this cold world, even the most ruthless of sharks. She lays it out plain. No family, crushing medical debt, and a mattress on the floor. Then she stares him down, taking her turn to ask questions. Lucian does not sugarcoat it. He admits he runs the city underworld. He tells her the hitmen wanted his empire, and they will definitely be back. She asks if he is a criminal. He says yes, zero hesitation. Any normal person would sprint for the door, but Serafina just nods. She figures digging 16 bullets out of his chest makes her an accessory anyway. She calmly offers him tea. He is mind blown, demanding to know why she saved a literal monster. Her answer is simple. I am a nurse and you are dying. Remember this. Your real character is exactly what you do when nobody else is watching. Life does not pause for drama, so she keeps brewing tea. Lucian tracks her from the bed, watching her like a hawk. He is trying to decode a puzzle he has never seen before. He tells her to grab the burner phone from his coat. Miraculously, it works. He orders her to call his contact with a chilling message. Tell them the ghost is alive. She makes the call. A gruff voice answers on the first ring. She repeats the code and says to come alone. The man demands her address and hangs up. She looks at Lucian and asks if she should be worried. He flashes a smile sharp as broken glass. Probably, he whispers. 20 minutes later, 3 heavy knocks shake the door. The takeaway is simple. Once you invite the storm inside your home, you better be ready for the thunder. Picture the scene, listeners. Serafina pulls open her door to find 2 massive shadows blocking the hallway light. Men in heavy wool coats, radiating violence. But right behind them is a tiny child gripping a ragged teddy bear. The largest goon spots Lucian bleeding out on the linoleum and freezes in panic. Boss, he gasps. But here is the moment that shifts everything. The little girl pushes past the killers, buries her face into Serafina's blood-stained medical scrubs, and whispers that one heavy word. Mommy. Time stops. Serafina sinks to her knees, pulling this trembling mafia princess into her arms, promising she is safe. The lesson here is quiet but true. Sometimes you never get to choose your family. The dark just leaves them shivering on your frozen doorstep. Then, Lucian finally speaks. Little Vivian whips around at his voice. "Papa," she cries, sprinting across the room. Lucian catches her with his one good arm. This ruthless underworld king looks at his child with raw, desperate love. But the warmth dies fast. His enforcer delivers the blow. A rival named Damien is burning their empire down. Safe houses destroyed. Men gone. Vivian looks at her broken father, holding way too much trauma for a 6-year-old, and calls him out for hiding his wounds. Through the ashes of his fallen syndicate, Lucian forces a gentle smile just for her. Serafina watches, completely paralyzed, a tough life lesson to swallow here. Never step into the shadows of someone else's war unless you are fully prepared to bleed for them. Then, the fading boss turns his dark eyes to her. Lucian stares through the pain and drops a heavy truth. She saved his life, binding them in a blood debt. She tries to refuse, but he silences her. In his dark world, debts are power, and she just painted a target on her back. If his rival finds out she kept the king breathing, she is dead. She has no choice but to follow. Fast forward to the Moretti estate. You and I are stepping into this nightmare together. It sits over Boston Harbor like a fortress, armed with gates thick enough to stop a truck and cold bulletproof glass. It is a beautiful, terrifying trap. Serafina stands in the marble entryway, lost, anchoring herself only to Vivian's tiny hand. Listen to this life lesson. If someone offers you safety behind walls built for a war, you are already drowning in the deep end. That small hand gripping hers keeps Serafina from running into the cold. Lucian, pale from blood loss, lays down iron laws. No leaving without guards. No speaking to outsiders. Serafina asks if she is a prisoner, and the Dawn smirks, calling it protection. A cold housekeeper marches her upstairs, but little Vivian begs her to stay. That desperate voice shatters Serafina's defenses. She caves, and the child beams. They step into the bedroom, and the sheer wealth is suffocating. Heated floors, heavy silk, a massive stone bathtub. But Serafina just collapses on the mattress, choking back tears. She is locked inside a beautiful cage. The life lesson here is simple. The softest silk sheets in the world cannot bring you any real peace if someone else holds the key to your front door. Serafina scrubs her hands until they are raw, still feeling the phantom heat of Lucian's blood. A soft knock breaks the quiet. The door opens to reveal little Vivian, holding her worn teddy bear, eyes full of heartbreak. Serafina pats the bed. Climbing up, the child drops a devastating thought. She whispers that heaven cannot be real, because if it was, her mother would have found a way to come back. That just breaks your heart, right? Serafina pulls her close, her voice shaking as she explains that sometimes people just cannot return. It is a brutal truth for a child to hear. Here is the life lesson. Sometimes the ones who love us the most are the ones we are forced to lose. And we simply have to find the strength to keep breathing, just to honor their memory. Vivian looks up and asks if Serafina has ever lost someone. You and I are going to unpack this together because the pain gets raw. Serafina swallows hard, admitting her little brother died when she was 17. The child asks if that is why she saves people now, begging her not to run away when things get scary. Every instinct screams at Serafina to flee this dangerous mansion, but feeling those tiny arms wrap around her, she lies and promises to stay. Now she is anchored in a house built on crime. Right on cue, heavy footsteps echo in the hall, stopping dead outside her bedroom door. The life lesson is simple. Making promises out of pity can easily lock you inside a literal nightmare. So always weigh the true cost of your words before you speak them. The heavy footsteps linger, then slowly shuffle away. It is Lucian out in the dark. The man has lost half his blood and can barely stand. Yet he drags himself through the halls just to guard his daughter. Serafina realizes this ruthless mobster hides a deeply fragile heart, and uncovering it might cost her everything. Morning hits the cold estate like a gavel strike. Serafina wakes with Vivian curled at her side. For 5 short seconds, she pretends this is a normal life, but when the child wakes up beaming, thrilled that Serafina kept her promise, the guilt wraps around her throat like wire. Then a sharp, violent banging rattles the bedroom door. A simple life lesson for you. Never let yourself drift off and get comfortable in a toxic environment. Cold reality is always waiting to kick your door down. The housekeeper barks through the door that Mr. Moretti expects her for breakfast. It is a royal command. Getting ready, Serafina notices Vivian moving like a silent robot, entirely used to doing things in isolation. They walk down echoing hallways, security cameras tracking every step. The dining room feels like a war council. Lucian sits there like the Grim Reaper in a custom suit, flanked by armed men radiating pure menace. The moment Serafina enters, the room goes dead silent. Lucian orders her to sit. But when his little girl sits beside him, his iron mask softens for just a heartbeat. It proves a simple life lesson. Endless power and money can buy you a giant fortress loaded with guards, but it cannot buy a genuinely warm and safe home for your family. Marcus leans in to discuss syndicate business, but Lucian shoots him a look so cold the room tastes like gunpowder. Plates of rich food arrive, but Serafina feels sick. 2 days ago she was eating ramen, now she is trapped with killers. Lucian coldly orders her to eat, dropping the terrifying fact that he knows she has only had coffee for 4 days. But what breaks Serafina's restraint is watching little Vivian. The child eats without making a sound, shrinking her body to stay invisible around these thugs. Serafina slams her fork down, demanding to know why his daughter is terrified to even breathe. Here is a solid life lesson. Children soak up the energy around them. If you raise them in a house thick with constant fear, they will erase their own shadows just to survive. The table freezes. Marcus looks ready to melt away while the other killers stare quietly at their plates. Lucian's jaw tightens, but Serafina holds her ground. She tells the boss he runs a prison, not a home. Lucian forces himself to stand, his wounded body shaking in pain. Instantly, every enforcer reaches for their concealed steel. The room turns to ice. Instead of exploding, Lucian calmly orders Vivian upstairs. Hearing her tiny footsteps fade away feels like a ticking time bomb. With the child gone, Lucian glares at Serafina, stating she knows nothing about his dark reality. Here is a valuable life lesson. Speaking truth to power is undeniably brave, but you must always be prepared for the fallout when you back a dangerous man into a corner. Serafina fires back. She tells him his daughter is so starved for affection. She clings to total strangers and calls them mommy. Lucian growls, insisting that keeping his child alive is true love. Serafina does not flinch, calling survival the bare minimum. You and I have to respect her fearlessness here. Lucian closes the distance. His bandages are soaking with fresh blood because he refuses to rest. He leans into her face, claiming he is no tragic hero. He is exactly the monster he chose to be, unblinking. Serafina looks him in the eye and tells him to choose better. The tension in the room is suffocating. A powerful life lesson emerges. You can never save someone who is entirely committed to their own destructive choices, no matter how much you want to fix them. Lucian backs away, dropping a chilling ultimatum. He orders his men to guard Serafina, forbidding her from leaving. Walking away, he whispers a final warning, telling her not to make him regret keeping her breathing. He exits with his killers, leaving her stunned. Trapped in this dark compound, she must learn the rules of survival fast. Never wander into the East Wing. Never ask about the bloodstains on the floor. Ignore the heavy locked doors. She tries her absolute best to fade into the walls. But little Vivian tracks her down like a shadow, everywhere she goes. It is sweet, but deeply terrifying. Here is your simple life lesson for the night. When you ignore blazing red flags just to play the savior, you will inevitably wake up locked inside a highly dangerous cage of your own making. Picture the scene, you and I, out in that freezing cliffside garden. Little Vivian follows Serafina everywhere, begging for a story. Serafina skips the fairy tales, sharing stories of everyday folks doing heroic things just to help someone in the dark. The girl is mesmerized, admitting her father only tells stories where monsters win. Serafina pulls the child close, whispering that in her world, the broken people fight back. Up above, Lucian watches from his dark office window. The ruthless boss tells himself he is just checking the perimeter, but his chest is tight with unfamiliar panic. It reminds us of a simple truth. Sometimes the strongest shield you can offer a shattered soul is just a single fragile spark of hope. Lucian is terrified, not of bullets, but because Serafina is making his little girl laugh. That pure sound echoes through his silent house like a ghost. He watches his daughter run to a total stranger, and the underworld king has absolutely no idea what to do. Suddenly, Marcus pushes the door open. Blood on the docks. 4 of their men wiped out. You can see the violent spike in Lucian's chest, but he forces it down. Emotion is a death sentence here. He orders his men to stand down. Marcus warns that the streets will smell cowardice, begging his boss to strike back. But Lucian just stares out at the freezing snow, calculating his next move in the quiet dark. Real power is knowing exactly when to hold your fire, even when the whole world is begging you to pull the trigger. Lucian swears he will wait in the shadows as long as it takes. 2 weeks crawl by, and then Serafina turns the house upside down. Vivian asks for a simple plate of pancakes, but the kitchen guards go cold. The head cook barks out that the boss ordered strict oatmeal, no exceptions. Serafina does not even flinch. She warns the giant that if he will not cook, she will do it herself. Minutes later, she is tossing flour around the kitchen, mixing batter from scratch. The ruthless staff watches her like she just pulled the pin on a grenade. They are completely paralyzed, but little Vivian is glowing with pure happiness. It is a beautiful reminder that sometimes you have to shatter the most terrifying, rigid rules just to let a child actually be a kid for one single morning. The Don steps through the doorway and stops dead. He stares at Serafina covered in flour, his little girl grinning, and his lethal guards frozen in panic. His voice is a dangerous rumble as he asks what is happening. Serafina does not back down an inch. She casually flips a pancake, telling him his daughter deserves to be a child today, not a tiny soldier on strict rations. The room stops breathing, bracing for the boss to erupt in violence. But then the unthinkable happens. Lucien slowly pulls a teller next to his daughter and orders Serafina to make enough for two. The cruelest man in the city just surrendered to a warm meal. It goes to show that even the coldest hearts can soften, if you possess the sheer courage to hold your ground for love. They share that meal in heavy silence, broken only by Vivian chattering about snowmen. Lucien just listens, truly hearing his child for the first time. When she runs off, he offers a quiet, genuine thanks. But Serafina sees right through his mask. She catches the gray exhaustion in his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. He has been sneaking to her room for bandages, too proud to let his men see him bleed. She warns him he will tear his stitches. He tightens his jaw, swearing he is perfectly fine. Serafina simply drops her gaze to the fresh, dark crimson blooming through the black fabric at his ribs. He looks down and mutters a bitter curse. You can build walls and act completely invincible, but ignoring the deep, hidden wounds you carry will always make you bleed out eventually. She has zero patience for his pride, ordering him to bring a medical kit to her room. 10 minutes later, a low knock echoes. She opens the door to find the king of the underworld, standing there, his bare chest, a brutal map of old knife fights and bullet holes. His stitches are violently ripped open. When she asks what happened, he lies, blaming the stairs. She locks the door, forces him into a chair, and preps the needle. She warns him the alcohol will burn. He stares dead ahead, whispering that everything hurts. As she pours raw antiseptic into the open flesh, the man does not so much as blink. He just watches her hands with dark, intense eyes. It teaches us something deep. True strength is never about dodging the pain. It is about holding your focus when the agony threatens to break you. Serafina pulls the thread tight, murmuring that he could have bled out. His response is cold poison. He tells her that in his world, showing weakness is a guaranteed death sentence. The honesty hangs in the air. Then, she pushes a dangerous boundary, asking how Vivian lost her mother. The silence turns into a physical weight. After a long minute, his deep voice breaks, crossfire. He stares at the floor and confesses that he ruined her, muttering that everything he loves turns to ash. He truly believes he is a walking curse. But Serafina refuses to offer pity. She snaps back, calling his tragic mindset total garbage, and she is entirely right. Blaming some cosmic curse for your deepest tragedies is nothing but a cowardly excuse to stop fighting for the ones who still need you right now. She demands to know if treating his daughter like a wealthy prisoner is his only plan. He growls that a golden cage is better than a tiny casket. She drops the gauze, tearing away his heavy armor. She looks him dead in the eye, telling him she sees the real man. A ghost who took 16 bullets and only keeps breathing, so his little girl is not left alone. A terrifying boss hiding his own blood. He mutters that it is just survival instinct, but the truth is obvious. Sometimes, surviving and loving are the exact same violent act. He tests his stitches, then offers her money and a fake name to run away from his dangerous world. But here is the real takeaway. You can try to scare good people away to protect them, but stubborn loyalty stays put no matter how dark the storm gets. Picture this moment. Serafina stares into the cold eyes of the most lethal man in the city, refusing to run. Lucien clenches his jaw, warning her she could vanish tonight. But she plays the heaviest card. She is staying for Vivian, who is playing alone in a mansion built on blood money. A dark smile tugs at Lucien's mouth as he calls her either insane or dangerously brave. He pulls on his shirt and leaves. Listen. Planting your feet for someone else is often the most beautifully terrifying thing you can do. Just 3 days later, hell breaks loose. The perimeter alarms scream. Red lights paint the walls, heavy boots pound the floorboards, and through the echoing chaos, little Vivian screams. Serafina does not freeze for a single second. She sprints directly into the absolute nightmare. She slides into the foyer, finding Lucien in a circle of armed killers. The boss looks carved from ice, gripping a heavy pistol. His lieutenant is shouting about a perimeter breach. Serafina grabs Lucian's arm, her voice raw, screaming for Vivian. The Dawn barely blinks. He coldly states that his little girl is already in the bunker running her invasion drill, a tiny child practicing for a massacre. The radio crackles, confirming a rival hit squad is in the courtyard. Right then, you can physically see the monster wake up inside Lucian's soul. Sometimes you have to let your darkest demons off the leash, just to keep your family breathing. He orders his men to seal the doors. He shoots Serafina one final, hollow look, commands her to lock herself away with his daughter, and steps calmly into the absolute slaughter. Lucian orders her to keep the vault locked and the shadows swallow him. Serafina is left in the cold hallway. The air is thick with the clatter of rifles and the drumbeat of her own pulse. She bolts for his study, tearing at the shelves until the bookcase swings wide to expose a heavy steel door. Having no code, she pounds on the metal, screaming the child's name. A torturous silence stretches before the heavy tumblers finally unlock. Little Vivian stands there, cheeks wet with tears, crushing a teddy bear to her chest. She looks up and bluntly asks if her dad is going to die. That innocent terror shatters the heart. Serafina swallows hard and lies, swearing he will be fine. We never really know what tomorrow holds. But sometimes true strength means wearing a brave face, when the terrible truth is just too heavy for a child to carry. Serafina promises the girl her father is practically bulletproof. She steps inside and the massive steel door hisses shut. The panic room is a cold bunker with bare walls, military rations, and a bank of glowing security feeds. It breaks your heart realizing this little girl grew up, watching her dad wage bloody wars from a monitor. Serafina pulls Vivian close on a cot, eyes glued to the flickering screens. You and I would be losing our minds right now. But the dark truth about this world is that your protector is often the most terrifying monster in the room. On screen, Lucian glides through the East Wing. He stalks the corridors like a shadow, weapon raised, moving like a pure executioner. Even Vivian whispers in the dark that her father looks scary. Serafina just holds the kid tighter, her own blood running absolutely cold. Pull up a chair, friends, because you and I are stepping into the dark tonight. Little Vivian huddles in the cold, whispering that the terrifying man outside is still just her papa. On the monitors, Lucian's men stalk the halls like wolves, but then nothing. Pitch black. Serafina holds her breath, praying for the generators, but only a sickly red emergency glare bleeds into the room. Then comes the sound that stops your heart. The heavy thud of tactical boots stopping right at their door. The handle violently jerks. A muffled, arrogant voice laughs through the steel, bragging that they have the blueprints to every secret room. It goes to show that no matter how thick the walls you build around yourself, your demons will always find a way inside. Serafina does the only thing she can, dragging the trembling girl deep into the shadows. The voice through the steel door barks out their twisted terms. They want the ultimate trade, the little girl, in exchange for Lucian's empire. Serafina feels cold panic rising in her throat. The vault door will not hold forever, and the father is fighting his own bloody war far away. No cavalry is riding over the hill tonight. Sometimes the hardest truth to swallow is that when no one is coming to save you, you have to become your own savior. Outside, the hitman orders his crew to blow the hinges, laughing off the warning that his boss wants the kid breathing. Serafina's blood runs completely cold. She desperately searches the bare room for anything sharp, nothing. Just a narrow air duct near the ceiling. She grabs Vivian by the shoulders and whispers that it is time to be braver than she has ever been. A harsh grinding drill bites into the heavy steel. They are breaking the lock. Serafina shoves a metal cot under the vent and lifts the trembling girl toward the ceiling. Vivian is far too small for this nightmare. Serafina locks eyes with her, demanding she crawl into the dark, stay silent, and find her father. When the little girl cries out, asking what will happen to her, Serafina lies without blinking, promising she is right behind her. We all learn eventually that real love often means taking the heavy hit so someone else can walk away. Her hands tremble violently as she forces the child into the dusty shaft. Vivian whispers she is scared, and Serafina admits she is terrified too. She slams the grate shut just as the vault door blows completely inward. Smoke fills the room, and 3 armed shadows rush in, but they only find a nurse, standing alone, her hands raised high in the quiet dark. The lead killer steps through the smoke, a sick smirk on his face, demanding the girl. Serafina stares straight through him and tells him she is gone. The man's heavy fist crashes across her jaw, filling her mouth with the sharp taste of copper. But she does not fall. Years of surviving the brutal chaos of an emergency room taught her how to absorb a heavy hit. It is funny how the absolute worst moments of your past are usually just quiet training for the battles waiting ahead. She spits the blood and repeats her answer. A thug points at the vent, cursing because his broad shoulders will never fit. The leader slowly turns his dead eyes back to Serafina. He smiles, a cold and empty thing, telling her the trick was clever but pointless. He casually reminds her his boss only needs the child breathing. He raises his gun, aiming directly at her chest while she simply closes her eyes. Stick with me here, because this is where everything turns upside down. With cold steel resting against her forehead, Serafina makes her peace. She would make the exact same choice again. A deafening roar tears through the room. But it is not her body hitting the floor, it is the hitman. Standing in the doorway, soaked in the blood of a dozen fights, is Lucian. His eyes are empty, dialed into something beyond human. 2 more shots, and the remaining men drop before they can blink. A harsh reminder that when you threaten someone's family, the universe will gladly unleash a monster to balance the scales. The mob boss looks at Serafina, his chest heaving, the icy killer fading just enough to let the desperate father back in. She points up at the vent. He lunges, ripping the metal away, screaming into the dark for his little girl. But only hollow silence answers him. Heavy smoke rolls over the shattered room, casting long shadows across the lifeless bodies. Just as the crushing silence becomes too much, a tiny trembling voice echoes from the dusty metal shaft. Little Vivian peers out, telling her father she was brave. Exactly like the nurse told her to be. Lucian pulls his daughter from the wall, burying his face in her hair, holding her so fiercely she squeals. Over her small shoulder, he meets Serafina's gaze. It is a heavy, silent exchange, a deep gratitude mixed with the bitter truth of his violent world. Marcus steps through the wreckage, confirming the threats are neutralized. Lucian barks an order to sweep the grounds, his hands never letting go of his child. At the end of the day, you cannot pretend to live a soft, normal life when your soul was built for war. You just have to fiercely protect what matters most. Lucian gently hands the girl off to his enforcer to check her for scratches. The second the heavy door closes behind them, the soft father vanishes, and the ruthless boss returns. Standing over the ruined floor, his voice goes completely dead. He explains that his rival Damien orchestrated this to gain brutal leverage. He stares at Serafina, welcoming her to the ugly reality of his life, warning her that men like Damien never stop until the dirt covers them. And this is the moment everything fractures. Serafina looks the hardened killer right in the eye and calmly tells him to put Damien in the ground first. The gentle healer just asked for blood. The lesson here is incredibly terrifying. If you spend enough time swimming in absolute darkness, you eventually stop running from the monsters and start thinking exactly like them. It is pure madness. Lucian expects the woman who spent the night digging hot lead out of his chest to preach about morality. She is so far past that now. A sharp, broken laugh slips from her lips as she drops the heavy truth. The exact second she shoved a crying 6-year-old into a metal tube to hide from killers, whatever innocence she had left completely died. She demands he end this war before the girl pays the price. Lucian gives her his dark stare, warning her the underworld will warp her soul beyond repair, but she cuts his protective speech to ribbons. She is not a fragile thing made of glass, and honestly, here is the harsh reality of life. Sometimes surviving a nightmare requires you to shatter the softest parts of yourself, just so you can build something bulletproof. He looks at her and finally sees the unbending steel. The air in that room is so thick you could cut it. Serafina holds his gaze, standing inches away from the aftermath of a massacre, and softly tells the devil himself that he should be terrified of her. It is a savage, beautiful moment. Lucian finally drops the shield. He tells her that if she crosses this line, there is no walking back. His face is still painted with the blood of his enemies as he presses a heavy weapon into her trembling hands. She takes the cold steel, her fingers shaking, but her chin stays high. He runs her through the mechanics, his deep voice instructing her to aim for the center and pull until the thread is gone. She asks him to train her, sealing her fate completely. It proves that sometimes you have to bury the person you used to be to survive the violent storm that is coming. She is no longer just a healer. For the first time tonight, a genuine smile touches Lucian's mouth, finally reaching his tired eyes. He swears to teach her the brutal art of survival, right after he buries the 5 men on his floor and tries to explain the blood to his little girl. He walks away, leaving her standing in the ruined room with a loaded weapon. This is the ultimate point of no return. The bridge is completely burned. Any normal person would be violently ill, but instead, a freezing armor of clarity settles over Serafina's mind. She checks the safety with a loud click, hides the steel, and walks out to find Vivienne. Because when the world goes pitch black, true strength is simply showing up for the innocent souls who depend on you. Even as she slips into the shadow of the underworld, she knows that child needs a guardian who will not flinch. You and I know a storm never truly passes, it just regroups. 3 days later, Damien sits in his penthouse opening a small package. Inside is a stark photo of Serafina at the range, the paper target completely blown out. On the back, Lucian left a brutal message, claiming her as his own and daring the rival boss to try his luck again. Damien just smiles that cold, hollow smile, already sketching out the flames. Far away in a concrete basement, the sharp scent of gunpowder hangs in the air. Serafina's hands are now rock steady, firing round after round, tearing the center mass to shreds. Lucian stands close, his deep voice guiding her aim. Here is the final truth to take with you tonight. If you stand your ground and practice facing the dark, eventually your raw fear will forge itself into undeniable power. You and I are about to step back into the dark. The gunshot echoes, leaving a heavy silence. Serafina lowers the weapon, another perfect hole punched through the paper. Yet Lucian steps from the shadows, warning her that her mind is still too loud. In his brutal world, hesitation is a death sentence. When she admits her instinct is to run, he quietly takes the heavy steel from her grip. Their hands brush and the spark is undeniable. For 3 weeks, this compound has been stripping away the healer to forge a weapon. He whispers that her new appetite for violence should terrify her. But here is a simple truth. Sometimes the most terrifying transformations are exactly what we need to survive the night. They are locked in a lethal waltz now, with no way out. She tells herself she is staying for little Vivienne, but the truth is heavier. The rush of the underworld has seeped into her blood. Trading pristine scrubs for the cold weight of a firearm is a shattering evolution. This shadowy mafia estate, against all odds, feels like home. The quiet in the halls is deafening. Lucian notes that Damien has been a ghost lately, and in their world, silence is the deep breath before a hurricane. Serafina calmly suggests ending their enemy, her new darkness making Lucian smirk. She claims she still saves lives just by taking others. It reveals a quiet, tragic lesson. Our life purpose can shift into something unrecognizable, but it remains ours to carry. Suddenly, Marcus throws open the basement door, his face pale. The storm has arrived. They ascend the stairs, expecting a gunman, but find a different kind of monster. A corporate shark in an immaculate suit waits in the office, radiating the cold confidence of a predator. Lucian reminds her she is trespassing, but she turns with unblinking eyes. She introduces herself as the lawyer for the Ashford estate, and the room goes cemetery still. The grandmother passed away years ago, yet her trap was perfectly laid. The lawyer slides a court order across the desk, demanding temporary custody of Vivienne. The temperature plummets. Lucian growls a warning, but she does not flinch. It brings us to a harsh midnight lesson. The most devastating threats rarely arrive with heavy artillery. Sometimes, they walk right through your front door, armed with nothing but a piece of paper. Serafina watches closely, bracing for the boss to shatter. Instead, Lucian radiates a terrifying, controlled fury. He quietly demands her grounds, and the lawyer drops the blade. She lists the near kidnapping, the armed guards, and anonymous tips. She flashes a wicked smile, refusing to name the informant. But you and I both know exactly whose shadow is in this room. It is Damien. This is his calculated strike to gut his rival. She gives Lucian 72 hours to surrender his daughter, or federal marshals will breach the gates. Lucian whispers, amazed she thinks she will leave alive. Here is a truth carved in stone. Push a protective father into a corner, and he will gladly reduce the entire world to ashes just to keep his child safe. Marcus steps forward, tense and ready to play the enforcer. But this lawyer is absolute ice. She warns that if she misses her check-in, the court order becomes a federal kidnapping warrant. 72 hours, she turns and vanishes. The second that heavy door clicks shut, the dam breaks. Lucian grabs a crystal decanter and hurls it against the wall, shattering it into dust. Marcus reaches out to steady his friend, but Lucian snarls, banishing him from the room. Serafina watches this untouchable king finally crack. It proves a painful truth about our deepest struggles. The hardest obstacles in life are rarely the ones we can defeat with violence. True strength is found in holding on to your mind when the entire world is built to break you. The silence in the ruined office is suffocating. Serafina voices the nightmare they are all avoiding. Damien is using the cold gears of the law to crush them. For the first time, this fearless boss looks paralyzed. When asked for his next move, Lucian admits he is lost. Later, Serafina finds Vivian curled up in the massive library, clutching a worn teddy bear, unaware her universe is collapsing. Serafina sits beside her to deliver the blow. Children always feel the change in the weather, and the little girl's smile instantly fades. Serafina tells Vivian she has to leave her father to stay safe. It is an agonizing reality, but it leaves us with a profound lesson. Sometimes, the only way to protect the soul you love most is to make the devastating choice to let them walk away. This little girl is far too young for the darkness, yet her instincts are razor sharp. Vivian looks up, tears brimming in her eyes, asking if she has to go because of the bad men. She knows her father is the king who is supposed to slay the monsters. Serafina tries the usual hollow comforts, murmuring that grown-ups do complicated things. But the child shatters, clinging to her and begging not to be left alone. Holding this sobbing girl in the dim light, something fundamental inside Serafina snaps. The healer dies and a dark tactician wakes up, ready to calculate any brutal path to keep them safe. It brings us to an undeniable life lesson. Love does not soften your edges, it sharpens them, turning you into an absolute monster for the people who anchor your heart. Midnight falls like a heavy shroud. Lucian sits alone in his dim office, nursing dark whiskey. Surrounded by useless legal documents, he looks like a fallen emperor, watching his legacy burn. Serafina steps into the shadows, pitching a desperate escape. She urges him to grab Vivian, forge new names, and flee before the clock stops. But Lucian slowly shakes his head. Raising a child while constantly staring over your shoulder is not a life, he says. It is just a slower death. He realizes his vast wealth and loyal soldiers are worthless now. It is a bitter lesson that catches up to us all. You can never simply buy your way out of the consequences you built with your own 2 hands. Staring into his empty glass, he finally believes he is the very monster the world claims he is. Serafina refuses to let him drown in guilt. Let us look at this together. Damien is hiding behind the law because he knows a straight street war would leave him in a body bag. Standing in the dim light, she delivers the most audacious strategy of their lives. She tells Lucian to surrender his entire empire, hand Damien the throne in exchange for dropping the custody battle. Lucian looks at her as if she has lost her mind, but her eyes are dead serious. It is only a phantom surrender. The moment Vivian is secure, they take everything back with ruthless prejudice. This is where we learn a vital strategy for survival. Never be afraid to deliberately lose a single battle, especially if it sets the perfect, devastating trap to win the entire war. The air in the room is thick enough to choke on. Lucian stares at her, realizing she is pillaging a play pulled directly from his own dark history. He murmurs that she has changed. She fires right back that she learned from the devil himself. The chemistry between them is a jagged wire, buzzing with chaos. Lucian warns her that this path has no return trip. Executing this means unleashing a massive bloodbath against anyone who threatened his little girl. Serafina does not blink. She coldly replies that the graves were going to be dug anyway, so they might as well put the right people in them. It is a haunting but true life lesson. When the safety of your family is on the line, you must surround yourself with people who will match your exact level of darkness. Picture the heavy silence of the night. Serafina is pushed to the edge, preparing to cross the final boundary, separating the healer from the criminal. Her hands shake, but her resolve is iron. She dials her old clinic mentor, Dr. Chen. He picks up, his voice heavy with exhaustion, demanding to know where she vanished to. But Serafina has no time for the ghosts of her old life. She begs for a highly illegal favor. She needs the sealed medical records of a deceased patient named Margaret Ashford. Chen freezes, the panic clear in his tone as he asks what kind of trouble she is buried in. Serafina just radiates a terrifying, quiet desperation. We learn quickly that fierce loyalty will always force you to eventually burn the quiet bridges of your past. Against his better judgment, the doctor gives in and pulls up the file. Margaret passed away 3 years ago, but hidden in the fine print is a revelation that stops the heart. The executor of her estate is a lawyer named Richard Voss. The name slams into Serafina like a physical blow. Why? Because Richard is Damien's own brother. The curtain falls on the grand illusion. This nightmare was never about a grieving grandmother. It is Damien, wearing a cheap legal mask, trying to tear Lucian's heart out. Serafina ends the call and carries this venomous secret back. She drops the bomb on Lucian, and the temperature in the room plummets. His eyes turn to absolute, unforgiving ice. A harsh lesson remains. The darkest truths always demand a heavy, violent toll. You and I know the reality of a rigged game. Playing by the rules when the deck is marked is just a slow way to die. The court is poisoned, but Lucian drops a revelation that flips the board. Margaret was never Vivian's blood grandmother. She was the mother of his first wife, gone before Vivian drew her first breath. Richard Voss built this entire custody claim out of dust and lies. The cold logic in Lucien's mind snaps into red-hot vengeance. He dials the men who make problems disappear, ordering a scorched earth crusade. He demands every financial shadow Richard has touched in 6 months. It teaches us a brutal lesson tonight. When your enemy tries to burn your house down, you do not just put out the fire. You burn their entire city to the ground. Lucien gave his men 48 hours to bury Richard so deeply the sun would forget his name. But 36 hours in, the operation turned to ash. Serafina was reading softly to little Vivian when the perimeter alarm shattered the silence. Marcus slammed the door open, his face the color of bone, a heavy weapon shaking in his grip. Federal agents were already flooding the iron gates. Serafina scooped the terrified child into her arms, sprinting through the dark mansion like it was a living nightmare. She searched desperately for Lucien, but he was miles away, completely blind to the raid. You and I both know how fast safety can shatter. Life teaches us a bitter lesson here. The exact moment we finally drop our guard is always the second the wolves break through the fence. They reached the safe room doors, but fate had closed the snare. Federal marshals cornered them, weapons gleaming under the red emergency lights. Marcus ran the brutal mathematics of survival into his head and dropped his gun. Rough hands flooded the room, dragging Serafina backward. She screamed until her throat tore, clutching Vivian to her chest, begging them to read the protective custody order. But they felt no pity. They pried the weeping little girl from her desperate grip, finger by finger. Vivian shrieked, reaching back as they hauled her out into the cold night. It leaves us with a painful truth to remember. Sometimes the rules meant to protect us become blunt weapons, and justice is simply a ghost we chase in the dark. Serafina fought like a cornered lioness, clawing at their tactical vests. Then an agent drove a heavy fist into her stomach. She collapsed onto the cold marble, gasping for air, forced to watch them carry the child away. Above the chaos, Vivian cried out for her mama. She did not call her Serafina. She called her mama. That single word shattered her worse than the physical bull blow. Dragged into an interrogation room and zip-tied to a chair, she faced an arrogant agent named Ramirez. The woman smiled, pretending they had just rescued a little girl from a monster. The life lesson here is sharp. The deepest, most permanent wounds never come from the enemies who strike us. They come from the innocent voices we are powerless to protect. Ramirez opened a thick file and went on the attack. She treated Serafina like a naive nurse who fell under the dark spell of a mob boss. But Serafina refused to play the victim. Her eyes burned with defiance as she fired back, stating she was the only thing keeping that child alive. She explained the custody battle was a ghost story, a legal scam cooked up by a dead woman's fake estate. Ramirez just offered a condescending sigh, looking at her like a tragic pawn lost in the underworld. Yet Serafina held her ground, demanding to know where they took her little girl. Here is a vital truth about human nature. Never mistake someone's quiet compassion for weakness. When you threaten the people they deeply love, that gentle heart will instantly turn to absolute, unbreakable iron. Ramirez dismissed the forged documents, resting on the arrogant belief that the system never fails. Then, the real nightmare arrived. Another agent stepped in, whispering urgently in Ramirez's ear. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by cold tension. She delivered a devastating blow. Lucien was missing. His car was found abandoned by the harbor, his entire security detail wiped out. Serafina felt her blood turn to ice as the pieces clicked together. The federal raid, the fake paperwork. Stick with me here, because this is where everything breaks. It was never a custody battle. It was a snare, perfectly designed to strip away the king's armor. The life lesson is chilling. The most dangerous traps in this world are always disguised as standard rules and procedures. The true architect of this misery was Damien. He weaponized the custody drama to trigger a federal raid, stripping away Lucien's guards to snatch the underworld king off the street. Serafina leaned across the table, pleading with the agents to see the truth. She begged them to realize Damien was the mastermind behind the chaos, but they remained stubbornly blind, suffocated by protocol. Ramirez coldly locked her down as a material witness, trapping her inside the iron jaws of the system. The life lesson here is one we must all remember. The most terrifying monsters do not hide in dark, forgotten alleys. They wear tailored suits, they masterfully manipulate the halls of justice, and they smile a charming smile while they tear your entire world apart. Picture the agony of this ride. They shoved Serafina into a dark sedan, speeding through the streets of Boston. She bit her lip until she tasted copper, Just to stop from screaming, Vivian was gone. Lucian had vanished. Everything she protected was erased in 60 minutes. They dragged her into a federal building, booking her like a hardened mobster. Fingerprints, mugshots, the cold camera flash. She gave them nothing but silence, tossed into a concrete holding cell. The heavy door suddenly swung open. Standing there was Catherine Wells, the vicious lawyer who ignited the custody war. Serafina clenched her fists, ready to draw blood, but Catherine spoke a single name. Vivian, here is a simple life lesson. When the devil holds the keys to someone you truly love, you swallow your fiery pride and you listen. The guard locked the door, sealing them in silence. Catherine dropped a devastating truth. The little girl refused to eat, weeping endlessly for her mama. Serafina's heart broke, but Catherine revealed a darker reality. She never worked for the grandmother. Her true employer was Damien Voss. He paid a fortune to fabricate the custody case, and now planned to hand Vivian to his syndicate, making her vanish like smoke. Lucian would never see his child again. The forged paperwork was officially stamped. By morning, Vivian would take a one-way flight into the abyss. Serafina's vision went red. She lunged across the cell, grabbed the corrupt lawyer by the collar, and slammed her back against the solid concrete. The life lesson is undeniable. Never back a desperate mother into a corner. When her child is at risk, all logic fades, and she will fight with terrifying violence. Serafina screamed, demanding to know how she could sell an innocent child to a monster. Catherine looked away in shame and laid out Damien's endgame. You and I need to look closely at this staggering cruelty. Damien wanted to break Lucian, but he found the king's second weakness, Serafina. He offered a sick trade. Serafina surrenders to him, and the little girl goes free. Lucian gets his daughter back, but loses the woman he loves. If she refuses, Vivian vanishes into the dark, and Serafina rots in a cell. Total checkmate. Serafina's hands began to tremble. She looked at the lawyer and asked the heaviest question. If I agree to this, do I die? Catherine could not meet her eyes. Probably, she whispered softly. Here is a painful life lesson. Sometimes, the only way to save the people you love is to willingly place yourself on the sacrificial altar. Catherine coldly admitted casualties were part of the business. Serafina slowly released the woman's collar. Her mind tried to calculate survival rates, but this was a mafia war, not a hospital. Between her own life and a little girl's future, there was zero debate. Serafina agreed to the fatal trade, but laid down ironclad demands. When Catherine pushed back, Serafina silenced her. Vivian goes to Lucian tonight. Full custody, all charges erased. Then came the most tragic command. She ordered the lawyer to lie to Lucian. Tell him I walked away willingly, so he won't burn the city down trying to rescue me. Life teaches us an agonizing truth here. True strength is never found in wielding power. It is found when you willingly surrender your entire life to shield the innocent from the coming fire. The lawyer finished a hushed call and delivered the final blow. Serafina had to leave immediately. No embraces, no tender goodbyes. The cell door groaned open, revealing Damien's enforcers instead of marshals. She stepped into the abyss, leaving behind the little girl she loved and the broken king who captured her heart. They shoved her into a windowless van, and just like that, she vanished into the night. Fast forward 12 agonizing hours. Lucian dragged himself into consciousness, choking on his own blood. He was strung up in a damp warehouse, his ribs fractured, his shoulder ripped from its socket. Standing above him, wearing a smile of pure venom, was Damien. Here is the tragic life lesson of sacrifice. Sometimes, walking willingly into the darkness to save another soul only guarantees the shadows will swallow you whole. Lucian coughed up blood, his voice a lethal growl demanding his daughter's location. Damien smirked, dropping a cruel twist. He cheerfully announced the girl was safe, the legal battle erased. Lucian's mind reeled. Why would a predator open the cage? Damien crouched down, whispering the agonizing truth. He found a way to destroy Lucian without harming the child. Serafina paid the price. She traded her freedom for Vivian's life. Damien buried her so deeply in the underworld that Lucian would never find her, leaving him alive simply to choke on the guilt. Lucian lunged like a rabid wolf, straining against the steel ties to rip Damien's throat out, but the chains held fast as the monster laughed. The life lesson here is heavy. The greatest burdens we ever carry are the silent sacrifices others endure to keep us breathing. Let's walk through this together, you and I, because this is where the knife really twists. Damien leans in and delivers the absolute worst of it. He tells Lucian that Serafina begged for him not to come looking for her. If he tries, Damien promises to wipe them both off the map. He walks away, bragging that letting him live with a shattered heart is the ultimate victory. For the first time, the legendary Ghost Monarch shatters, But here is the thing. He only stays broken for 17 minutes. 17 minutes kneeling in his own blood before the grief burns away, leaving nothing but pure, unadulterated rage. The monster wakes back up. It is a hard truth we all learn eventually. Sometimes you have to hit absolute rock bottom before you find the raw strength to finally fight back. Leaving him alive was the biggest mistake Damien could ever make. You never leave a wounded king breathing. Lucien leans against a cold concrete pillar and slams his dislocated shoulder against the stone. The joint forces its way back into place with a sickening crack. White-hot agony flashes across his vision, but he swallows the scream. His wrists are bound with military-grade plastic, but his hands are so slick with his own blood that he rips them free. He shreds his own skin, numb to everything but the fire in his chest. When the restraint snaps, he staggers up on shaking legs. Broken ribs, battered skull, operating at maybe 60% capacity. But listen to me. You do not need perfect strength to win. You just have to completely refuse to quit. The tour starts now. Look at the absolute arrogance of it all. Damien actually leaves the door unlocked, thinking Lucien is too broken to ever walk through it. But instead of crying in the dark, Lucien steps out into the freezing night, smiling through split lips. He goes straight to his own home, which is crawling with federal agents. He walks right through his front door, soaked in fresh blood, completely ignoring the weapons pointed at his chest. The agents step back. They know who pays the bills in this city. He marches past them, scattering the child services workers like frightened birds, desperate to find his daughter. You and I know how this works. Never corner a wounded animal, and never underestimate a broken man. That is exactly when they become the absolute most dangerous threat in the room. Picture this moment. Little Vivian is sitting there, totally wrecked, clutching a battered teddy bear. Her eyes are swollen from crying. When she looks up and whispers for her papa, you can almost hear the cold, jagged edges of his heart shatter all over again. He ignores the stabbing pain of his broken ribs and pulls her into a desperate embrace. She clings to him like he is the only thing keeping her world from falling apart. Then she asks if he is going to save Serafina. Lucien remembers Damien's sick threat, but looking down at his daughter, he makes a promise to bring her home. Sometimes the greatest lesson in this life is simply finding the courage to show up for your family when the world goes dark. 2 hours later, he is destroying a heavy bag like a man possessed. Every punch he throws is pure agony on his shattered ribs, but the physical pain is nothing compared to the silence in his home. Marcus steps into the shadows of the gym and delivers the news. The feds are gone and Vivian is safe. But then comes the impossible question. What is their next move? Lucien turns around slowly. Blood is soaking right through his bandages and he looks like death walking. We find her, he whispers, no matter what it costs. Marcus tries to warn him. He says Damien wants a rescue attempt, that he will kill Serafina the second they get close. But Lucien knows she is still alive to be used as bait. Here is a simple truth. Real loyalty means walking straight into the fire, because the people you love are always worth the burn. The hunt is officially on. Lucien stands in the cold basement, surrounded by steel and heavy memories. He gives Damien exactly 48 hours to celebrate his false victory. It is the eerie calm before a terrible storm. He grips a weapon, thinking only of Serafina, making a silent, brutal vow in the dark. Damien wanted to break him, but he just created a monster. Remember this well. You never push a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose. This king is ready to burn the world to ash for the woman he loves. Miles away, Serafina opens her eyes to pitch-black darkness. Her head is pounding, her wrists are bound tight, and the air smells like cheap gasoline and salt water. The floor sways beneath her. She is trapped in a tiny cabin, completely stripped of her medical scrubs. This is a terrifyingly professional operation. The heavy steel door groans open, framing a guy in a tailored suit who looks like expensive muscle. He tells her she is finally awake. When she demands to know where they are, he just smirks since they are somewhere his boss owns. But watch Serafina work. She tests the thick plastic around her wrists. They want her alive, so she uses that. She stares the goon dead in his cold eyes and offers to sell out Lucien. She promises to hand over secret accounts and codes. The suit laughs, asking if she would really betray her own man. She drops a heavy truth on him. She will do whatever it takes to survive today, just so she can destroy them tomorrow. Sometimes, brutal honesty is the greatest weapon you have to sell a lie. He locks the door, leaving her to plot her escape. You and I know she is not just some helpless pawn. She spent a month surviving in Lucien's brutal world, and every bitter lesson she learned is kicking in right now. She scans the tiny cabin. The door is solid iron, but she spots a sharp, rusted bolt sticking out of the wall. Without wasting a second, she starts sawing her restraints against the metal, tearing at the plastic fiber by painful fiber. She understands that time is running out. The hard lesson here is that nobody is coming to save you unless you try to save yourself first. Back on dry land, those 48 hours bleed away. Lucien's crew tears into Damien's history, mapping out fake companies and hidden properties. And then they find the chilling truth. Damien had been planning this total war for months. Taking Serafina was just the opening move. Marcus reports that Damien is swallowing up their territory, hitting 5 operations in a single morning. Damien actually believes he broke the king. Lucien just stares at the map with terrifying gray eyes and tells them to let him think that. The only thing that matters is her. They track a ghost ship heading up the coast toward Rhode Island. That means searching hundreds of private docks. Lucien orders them to spend every dollar and use every man they have. Marcus starts sweating, asking how to get her out without getting her killed in the crossfire. Lucien looks up, and the raw murder in his eyes makes Marcus step back. By any means necessary, he whispers. True loyalty means you burn the world down to keep your family warm. By the third sunrise, the tech team catches a massive break. They trace her to an isolated estate on the Connecticut shoreline, owned by Damien's corrupt lawyer brother. The satellite shows heavy walls and enough armed guards to start a small war. Lucien does not wait for absolute confirmation. He feels it in his bones. Damien thought hiding behind legal names and high fences would keep him safe, but he is dead wrong. The defense is over. Lucien handpicks 12 of his absolute best men. Guys who would march straight into hell for him. They gear up in silence, strapping on heavy armor. Lucien pulls out the exact same gun he used to carve out his empire all those years ago. The lesson here is a dangerous one. Arrogance will always make you completely blind. The ghost is officially hunting. Let's ride with them, you and I, through the freezing dark. Lucien looks at his men and lays down the law. They go in like ghosts. Anyone standing in their way gets dropped. Zero mercy. As the black cars tear down the highway, Lucien sits alone with his regrets. He thinks about how Serafina pulled bullets from his skin, how she turned his cold house into a home. He realizes he never actually told her he loved her. He only knew how to speak in violence. It is a tragedy we see too often. Waiting for the perfect moment to tell someone how you feel is a massive mistake. You have to speak up while you still have them. He swears to the night that if she dies, he will scorch the earth. The massive estate bleeds out of the morning fog. The crew splits up. They cut the power. It is showtime. Close your eyes and picture the chaos. Lucien and Marcus drive their heavy truck right up to the main gates, serving themselves up as the ultimate bait. They are making maximum noise, pulling every guard's attention away from the silent team infiltrating the harbor. Lucien grips the steering wheel, takes a deep, ragged breath, and pictures Serafina smiling at his daughter. Then he gives the signal. The entire power grid for the estate drops instantly to black. Before backlights can even flicker on, the water team swarms the docks. And Lucien? He slams his foot on the gas, driving 2 tons of metal straight through the iron gates. Sparks fly. Alarms scream, and chaos erupts as the guards open fire. But the boss is already moving, his weapon drawn, acting with the terrifying grace of a lifelong predator. Never push a desperate man into the dark. You and I know what it means to bleed for something, do we not? 2 cartel guards hit the floor before their eyes can even register the threat. Marcus sweeps to the right, filling the air with heavy suppression fire. Lucien moves through the tearing smoke like a ghost returning to his darkest days, back when survival just meant being the most brutal soul in the room. A stray bullet snaps right past his ear, but he never blinks. He fires back, dropping another man in the haze. The front doors violently blow inward from the charges, splintering into the night. Smoke pours over the marble floor as Lucien clears the entryway. Gunfire echoes from the other wings. His crew is deep in it now. He charges up a massive staircase, swallowing the agonizing fire of shattered ribs in his chest. He reaches the top landing, staring down a cavernous hall. The brutal truth we all must face is simple. Sometimes you just have to walk through pure agony to save the ones you love. The radio statics out in his ear. The side wings are clear. Lucien shatters the first door off its hinges, finding nothing. The second is an empty office. The third is locked heavy and tight. He buries 3 rounds into the deadbolt and kicks it wide open. Inside, Serafina is strapped to a chair, battered, bruised, but breathing. Their eyes lock across the room, a heavy storm of relief and violent vendetta crashing between them. She whispers that he actually came for her. He offers a grim smile, saying he was never good at following instructions. He slices her restraints and she collapses against his chest. He holds her, his weapon still aimed at the doorway. She looks up at his bloodied face, softly telling him he looks like garbage. He smirks, whispering, "It has been a very long week, think about it." True loyalty means walking into the absolute worst darkness just to pull someone out. Despite the deafening roar of gunfire tearing through the walls, Serafina almost manages a faint smile. But Lucian is pure, cold focus. They have to move right now. It turns out this massive estate was nothing but a hollow decoy. Marcus bursts into the doorway, his eyes wild with panic. They have a terrifying problem involving federal agents and helicopters. They have exactly 5 minutes before the entire property is swarmed. Lucian mutters a dark curse, realizing Damien pulled the strings on this entire setup. Now, stick with me here because the nightmare is just beginning. They sprint through the shattered, blood-soaked halls, stepping over fallen guards. They reach the back extraction point, standing a mere 10 feet from freedom. Then, Damien steps out from the pitch-black shadows, pressing the cold steel of a pistol directly to Serafina's head. The lesson here is brutal. Never let your guard down until you are truly safe. The night air goes completely dead. Everyone freezes. Damien smiles with the empty eyes of a true psychopath. Lucian demands he let her go, his voice vibrating with rage. But Damien only laughs. He warns that if they shoot, his reflex will pull the trigger, taking Serafina down with him. It is a terrifying standoff. The rhythmic thud of federal choppers grows louder, seconds away from lighting up the dock. Damien tells them to drop the guns or her life ends. Lucian tries to call his bluff, reminding him that killing her now ruins his sick revenge. Damien smirks, saying he is tired of the games. But Serafina watches Lucian. She sees the cold math running behind his eyes, hunting for an impossible angle. He spent a month teaching her how to survive. Now it was time to use it. Real strength is learning to step up and save yourself when the world leaves you with absolutely zero options. She stares into Lucian's eyes, whispers not to trust her, and drops her weight to the floor, snapping Damien's line of fire wide open. It is a breathtaking gamble. Lucian squeezes his trigger before she even hits the concrete. The bullet rips straight through Damien's shoulder. Marcus and the crew instantly open fire, lighting the crime lord up. Damien crashes hard, bleeding out into the shadows but still alive. Lucian yanks Serafina up, and they tear down the dock toward the speedboats just as federal choppers breach the skyline. Loudspeakers scream down at them, but they slam the throttles forward. Gunfire shreds the dark water around them as they rocket away into the night. They ditch the boats, jump into getaway cars, and tear back toward Boston, consumed by the violent shaking of an adrenaline crash. The takeaway here? Sometimes taking a massive, reckless risk is the only way out of an impossible grave. In the fleeing car, Lucian growls that her stunt was incredibly stupid. She fires right back, pointing out that it worked. He warns her they could have died. But Serafina drops a haunting truth. She tells him that dying is just a part of their dark reality now. So they might as well risk it for something that actually matters. Lucian stares at her in the dim dashboard light. He realizes the sweet nurse who once saved him is gone. She has been forged in the exact same brutal fires as him, and he deeply respects it. He quietly vows to burn Damien's entire syndicate down to ash. Suddenly, Marcus snaps a look into the rearview mirror, his face washed in pure dread. Their mole inside the feds just tipped him off. Massive warrants were just issued. They are now the most hunted targets in Boston. Here is the truth. When life backs you into the darkest corner, you have no choice but to stand tall and fight your way out. We are looking at absolute madness tonight, you and I. Lucian is consumed by a burning fury. Damien is literally bleeding out in a sterile hospital bed, surrounded by an army of federal agents, yet he is still trying to play chess. Sarah quietly asks what the next move is. But Lucian? He does not care about the flashing sirens or the badges. He wants to march right into that hospital tonight and finish the job. He is cashing in every bloody favor, pulling every single trigger left in his arsenal. The law is swarming the cold streets of Boston, but Lucian is totally locked into his tragic vendetta. Here is a late-night life lesson. Sometimes overthinking is the absolute worst enemy you can have. When your back is pressed hard against the wall, you do not sit in the shadows planning. You bring overwhelming force, burn the board down to the ground, and sort through the ashes when the smoke clears. They hit the safe house by noon, and Lucian fades into the shadows to prepare for outright war. Meanwhile, Serafina rushes inside and finds little Vivian sitting across from a cold government social worker. For a heavy second, nobody in the room breathes. Then Vivian breaks, launching her tiny body across the floor, sobbing and screaming for her mother. It is a suffocating gut punch. The kid is terrified, crying about the scary suits and the endless questions. The worker is just scribbling notes like a machine. But Serafina totally ignores her. She drops to her knees, clutching the trembling girl. Vivian begs to know if they will ever leave her again. Serafina holds her fiercely, promising she is staying forever. Listen to me, because this matters. True loyalty is not just about destroying your enemies. It is about showing up for the fragile souls who need you most when the whole world falls apart. Inside the safe house, the social worker warns Serafina she is violating strict custody laws. Serafina stares at her with eyes like shattered ice, coldly telling the woman to either arrest her or back off. Even little Vivian notices the heavy shift in her mother, whispering that she is sharper now, just like her mob boss Papa. Serafina softens, asking if that is a bad thing. The kid smartly shakes her head no, because now she can protect herself. Across the property, Lucian is assembling a small lethal army. By sunset, they map out a flawless path for revenge. Damien is locked down in a hospital room, surrounded by federal agents and cartel shooters. A direct gunfight means certain death, Daus. Lucian tells his men they are doing something entirely alien to their underworld. They will expose the raw truth. Because you and I both know that sometimes, the absolute truth is the greatest weapon of all. He uploads a massive file to every major news outlet in Boston. We are talking about 3 years of undeniable evidence, ripping the veil off Damien's criminal empire. It outlines the murders, the dirty money, and how his corrupt brother buried the bodies. Marcus stares at the screen, stunned. If they leak this, Damien's federal protection evaporates instantly. The agents will be forced to arrest him or go down as accomplices. Lucian is weaponizing the legal system itself. A crew member warns that pressing send will burn every bridge they have. They will never operate in Boston again. Lucian surveys the room with chilling confidence. He says the city can finally have itself back, but only after Damien pays the ultimate price. Then, he smashes the send button. The heavy lesson here: if you are going to absolutely burn your bridges, make sure your worst enemies are standing right on top of them. The secret files hit the internet, and the midnight news cycle completely explodes. Federal agents are yanked away from guarding Damien to answer for shielding a mob boss. Absolute chaos. Right in that confusing sweet spot, the second phase of Lucian's plan drops. At 9 at night, 12 of his men stumble into the emergency room faking severe injuries. The place turns into a total madhouse. Under the cover of panic, 3 hitters slip past security with weapons buried in medical bags. Up on the 4th floor, 2 stubborn feds are still planted outside Damien's door. Then, in walks Lucian himself, draped in stolen scrubs with a fake medical chart. He coldly tells him he needs to check the patient's vitals. The feds look at him completely confused, having no idea the Grim Reaper just walked in. The life lesson for tonight: the absolute loudest distraction will always hide the deadliest knife. Let us picture this together, you and I. Lucian slips past the federal agents, a shadow wearing a borrowed hospital badge. He pulls a weapon from beneath a medical chart, aiming it dead at Damien. Damien reaches for the call button, but Lucian promises to drop the guards too. Damien mocks him, daring him to shoot, swearing Lucian will never escape alive. Lucian is ice, he does not care. As long as his enemy dies first, his finger tightens. Just 1 pound of pressure to end this bitter vendetta. But in that agonizing second, the memory of his little girl echoes in his mind. Are you leaving me again? It is a quiet truth. Giving into rage is an easy fix, but true strength is stepping back from the edge to protect the ones who actually need us. The madness in that room is suffocating. Lucian stands still, weapon drawn, aching with the burden of his violent past. Right when you brace for the fatal shot, he lowers the gun. Damien barks out a laugh, calling him soft. But Lucian is done playing by the rules of the gutter. He raises his phone, and the game is over. Every local news station is broadcasting Damien's darkest secrets. His protection is shattered, and his empire is turning to dust. The cruelest twist? Damien's own brother sang to the authorities to save himself. Looking out over the Boston skyline, Lucian delivers a crushing final blow. Damien is going to a brutal federal prison, and every rival he crossed will be waiting. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting a monster drown in his own poison. Pure horror washes over Damien as the reality of this revenge sets in. He stammers, realizing he is nothing but a walking target now. Lucian coldly replies that he is simply making him pay the toll. The brilliant tragedy is that Lucian does not need to pull the trigger himself. He just needs to ensure this fallen boss spends the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for a hungry hitman in the shadows. Lucian flashes a hollow smile, admitting Damien almost won. But thanks to a brave nurse, Lucian learned a profound lesson. The absolute hardest choice in this broken world is choosing to live, rather than choosing to kill. He casually strolls past the armed agents while Damien screams helplessly. Meeting his crew in the dark garage, Lucian softly whispers, "It is done." Marcus studies his boss in the dim garage, noting that Damien is still breathing. Lucian whispers that the man will soon wish he was not. They drive away while police choppers swarm the hospital. Trapping a crime lord who just learned a harsh truth, pure mercy, is often more brutal than a bullet. Back at the mansion, Serafina finds Lucian staring at the ocean as the sun rises. She softly asks why he spared his enemy. Lucian confesses that little Vivian asked if he was leaving her again, and that innocent question shattered his armor. He spent his whole life drowning in violence, and it is time to break that toxic cycle. Serafina leans against the balcony, wondering where they can possibly run. Lucian watches the morning light and answers, "They need to find somewhere perfectly normal." Serafina doubts a quiet life is possible for people stained by the underground. Lucian says there is only one way to find out. As dawn breaks, Vivian wanders out, rubbing her sleepy eyes, asking if they are leaving. "Stick with me here." Because the emotion in this moment is heavy. Lucian looks at this child who has survived far too much darkness, promising they are heading somewhere safe. When Vivian innocently asks if there will be pancakes, Serafina laughs through her tears, promising a mountain of them. The three stand there, finally holding on to a fragile hope, but the clock is ticking. Marcus runs the cold numbers and delivers a grim update. They have exactly 72 hours before the federal agents bring the hammer down. 72 hours to vanish without a single trace. Over the next 12 hours, Lucian tears down his dark kingdom. He filters millions through shell companies, hands his territory to loyal men, and dumps crates of artillery into the cold harbor. The ghost monarch is erasing his own legend. Trucks roar outside, hauling away his violent past. Inside, little Vivian is quietly drawing a normal house. No high walls, zero bulletproof glass. She murmurs that she wants to live somewhere warm with no basements, because basements are just for hiding. It is a striking truth. Holding on to toxic baggage only keeps you locked in the shadows. Sometimes you have to burn down the life you built just to feel the sun on your face again. Serafina pulls the girl into a tight hug, promising the hiding is officially over. Vivian looks up, asking a heartbreaking question: will her dad be less scary when they leave? Serafina wants to say yes, but refuses to lie. She explains that her father will always have sharp edges, but in a new home, he might never need them. It is a harsh reality with a deep lesson. You cannot erase a brutal past, but changing your environment gives your soul room to breathe. The doors suddenly fly open. Lucian walks in, looking like he has not slept in a decade. Dismantling his empire has drained him completely. Just as they prepare to run, a wild complication arrives. Catherine Wells, the ruthless attorney who started this nightmare, demands an urgent meeting. She claims to hold crucial intelligence before they vanish. This is definitely about to get messy. Suspecting a trap, Lucian meets Catherine at a busy suburban cafe. She drops her courtroom armor, wearing plain clothes and looking remarkably fragile. Lucian slides into the booth while his men secure the perimeter. Catherine skips the small talk, sliding a thick envelope across the table. This envelope is pure dynamite. It holds every dark secret Damien Voss ever buried: the fraud, the kidnappings, the bloody money trails, everything needed to ruin him. Lucian narrows his eyes, demanding her true motive. She exhales a shaky breath, admitting that stealing a little girl crossed a moral line she could not stomach. It is a vital reminder. Even ruthless players have a breaking point. Force people to commit pure evil, and they just might hand your head to your worst enemy. Lucian coldly reminds the lawyer she could have just walked away. Catherine grips her coffee, drowning in massive guilt. She insists this folder is the ultimate leverage, proving Damien S. men committed brutal perjury. She urges Lucian to trade the criminal empire to the feds for ironclad immunity. Lucian studies her face, searching for a trap, but only finds crushing regret. Asked what she expects in return, she softly tells him to consider it penance for tearing a little girl from her father. Then she simply walks away. It reveals a hard truth we all must learn. Owning your mistakes is merely step one. Doing the dangerous work to actually fix the damage is what counts. She cannot undo the past, but she just handed Lucian the absolute keys to his family's freedom. Lucian sits alone, staring down two agonizing paths. Grab his family and run like hunted ghosts, or stay and use this file to wipe Damien's empire off the map. Let us look at this together, you and I. After reading the documents, his choice is clear. We cut to the prosecutor's office. Lucian strolls in wearing a sharp suit instead of tactical gear, completely unarmed. He sits across from the chief attorney like they are old friends. She coldly states they do not negotiate with fugitives. But Lucian teaches us a masterful lesson right here. When you know exactly how much power you hold, you never beg for a seat at the table. You walk straight into the lion's den and demand one. He is done running in the shadows. He is about to drop the biggest trump card of his life. Lucian looks the prosecutor dead in the eye. He tells her they will negotiate today, because he is handing her the biggest mob takedown in history. He slides the envelope across the desk. It has everything RICO charges, money laundering. Enough evidence to lock Damien and his capos away forever. The attorney reads the files, shock widening her eyes. She calls it a gift. Lucian does not blink. He demands full immunity for his family and his crew. Sealed records, wiped warrants, a clean slate. She leans back, calculating the massive career boost. It is a brilliant life lesson. In any high-stakes negotiation, unshakable confidence is your greatest weapon. Know your worth and never flinch. Finally, she asks the golden question. Why flip now? After 20 years of ruling the dark. The attorney asks why he waited so long. Lucian lets his guard down. His daughter deserves better than speaking through prison glass. The violent life costs too much now. But the prosecutor demands a steep price. She needs him on the witness stand against every boss in that file. Lucian closes his eyes. He pictures Vivian sketching a safe home. He remembers Serafina, forced to hold a weapon to survive his mistakes. In that quiet room, he finally kills the ghost monarch and agrees to testify. They shake hands, and the weight of a criminal empire slides off his shoulders. Here is our final lesson. Real strength is never about hoarding power. It is knowing when to let it go for the people you love. The immunity deal is signed. The nightmare is finally over. Welcome to the midnight hour, friends. You and I are going to unpack a heavy story today. Lucian was a man who ensured his promises were etched in stone. He makes a final call to Marcus, confirming his crew secured full immunity. Damien is now strictly the government's problem. Marcus offers a grim warning, reminding him the underworld will hunt him for breaking their blood code. But Lucian embraces the threat, preferring to be a nameless target than a king in hell. On a bitter Tuesday morning, they abandon Boston forever. No armored convoys, just a broken man, a weary nurse, and a child fleeing the darkness. Vivian watches the city vanish in the rearview mirror, tracing the glass. The lesson we find here is profound. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is simply walking away from the empire that demands your soul. From the back seat, Vivian asks in a quiet voice if they will ever go back. Lucian meets her eyes in the mirror, asking if she wants to. The child shakes her head, murmuring that the city holds too many ghosts. Serafina offers a gentle smile, joking that her reading habits are rubbing off on the girl. As they push southward, winter snow melts into rushing streams. They hit Virginia by dawn. Gripping the wheel, Lucian realizes a terrifying truth. He cannot recall the last time he drove without scanning the road for assassins. It is a fragile, beautiful freedom. They finally settle in a nameless coastal town in North Carolina, renting a humble place near the waves. It perfectly mirrors the bright, safe houses Vivian used to sketch. It teaches us a simple truth. Peace is not a place you find on a map, but a sanctuary you build from the ashes of your deepest trauma. The house breathes with the scent of salt water instead of copper and gunpowder. Windows slide open with a gentle push, free of heavy security locks. The sheer normalcy is suffocating for a man used to war. While Serafina unpacks their scattered lives, Lucian constructs a bookshelf with the exact same lethal precision he once used to dismantle rival families. He confesses, his voice a low rumble, that this ordinary life feels like a lie. He questions if they are merely pretending 2 decades of bloodshed never happened. Serafina pauses, looking at him with immense clarity. She tells him they are not erasing the darkness. They are simply refusing to let it dictate their tomorrow. He thanks her softly for not abandoning him in the cold. We must learn a vital lesson here. Acknowledging our deepest scars is the only true way to keep them from writing the rest of our story. He expresses his deep gratitude, amazed she stayed when any rational person would have fled. He fears his violent world cost her everything. But Serafina shakes her head, her voice steady. She insists it did not cost her everything. It only cost her who she used to be. Truthfully, she despised that hollow version of herself. That exhausted nurse was so consumed with saving dying strangers, she entirely forgot how to rescue herself. She tells him that he and little Vivian taught her the real meaning of survival. It is about letting people in. Suddenly, Vivian dashes into the room, eyes wide with wonder, exclaiming that the house sounds like it is breathing with the ocean. Hearing the child's pure, fearless laughter washes over them like rain. It shows us that shedding our old identity is often the painful, necessary price we pay to finally discover exactly where we belong. Staring into the quiet kitchen, Lucian mutters a dark confession. He is terrified they are going to ruin this. He has no blueprint for being a father, only for being a monster. Serafina offers a tired, knowing smile. She reminds him they are both profoundly broken people, but they will walk through the wreckage together. That first month is a suffocating struggle. The phantom weight of the underworld clings to him. He obsessively checks deadbolts and views tourists as potential assassins. The poison of paranoia runs deep. At 3 a.m, Serafina finds him gripped by dread, a heavy gun in his hand watching the empty street. She gently pries the steel from his fingers. You and I both know this agonizing truth. Letting go of the armor that kept you alive is terrifying, but it is the only true way to let your battered soul heal. The transition to peace is agonizing. They have zero comprehension of a normal existence, but the world demands they adapt. Serafina suffers through brutal night terrors, jolting awake in cold sweats, her fingers trembling as she constantly checks for news on the syndicate trials. Trauma, it seems, is a relentless ghost that follows you across state lines. But the universe has a strange sense of irony. Lucian, a ruthless enforcer whose hands were sculpted for violence, finds quiet work baking bread before dawn. He trades cold steel for flour, working the heavy dough as if kneading the rage right out of his muscles. Serafina finds purpose again at a sleepy local clinic. The healing is a grueling silent crawl. The lesson is undeniable. We can never simply erase our dark past, but we possess the power to mold that residual pain into a steady foundation for a beautiful tomorrow. At the clinic, Serafina quietly bandages scraped knees, remembering the calling that first drew her to medicine. She is no longer a tragic hero, just a harbor in the storm. Vivian enters the first grade, blissfully free from the shadow of a criminal empire. She trades the lethal anxiety of the underworld for innocent playground disputes, and soon begins calling them Mama and Papa. Half a year into their exile, they celebrate her 7th birthday on the sandy shore. Lucian bakes a cake, wrapping small gifts in wrinkled newspaper. It is a humble display, yet it carries more warmth than any gilded mansion ever could. Vivian closes her eyes, wishing to stay in this golden moment forever. It offers a profound truth. You do not need vast fortunes to create perfection. The most precious memories are often the quiet ones, wrapped up in cheap paper and unconditional love. Lucian murmurs that some wishes are meant to be spoken aloud. But you and I know this fragile peace was always a ticking clock. Exactly 1 year after their escape, the phone rings, shattering the silence. It is the federal prosecutor. The syndicate kingpin is finally facing trial, and they demand Lucian take the stand. Lucian grips the receiver, his knuckles turning bone white. They offer family protection, but his refusal is instant. He pictures Vivian sleeping soundly without night terrors, and Serafina finally smiling. He refuses to drag them back into the blood-soaked arena. He declares he will face the fire alone. Standing in his quiet kitchen, the icy grip of his past tightens around his throat once more. The lesson here is inescapable. You cannot outrun your past forever. Eventually you must turn and look your darkest demons in the eye to shield the people you love. Serafina finds him paralyzed in the kitchen, and he delivers the crushing blow. The trial begins in 3 weeks. Instantly, her mind snaps back to the brutal survival calculus of the underworld, anticipating the danger. She warns him the syndicate's hitters will absolutely hunt him down before he speaks. Fleeing is an option, but Lucian is exhausted from watching shadows. This testimony is the only way to sever the vendetta permanently, even if it demands his life. Then, Vivian peeks around the doorframe, her small eyes wide with the terror of abandonment. That agonizing fear cuts the hardened killer deeper than any blade. He kneels, swearing he only needs to lock away the monsters so they never return. The truth is unavoidable. Running only feeds the anxiety in your chest. To claim lasting freedom, you must walk deliberately into the flames and finish the battle once and for all. Vivian's voice trembles as she asks what happens if he does not come back. Lucian swallows his grief, promising that Serafina will always keep her safe, vowing to call every single night. As the child leaves, Lucian rises, the phantom aches of a violent life weighing on his bones. He confesses to Serafina that he has no desire to be a martyr, but she looks at him with sorrowful pride, knowing he will go because his soul demands it. The memory of her saving him in the freezing snow flashes in his mind. Some debts require courage to repay. Soon he is back in the suffocating air of a Boston federal courthouse. For 3 agonizing days he drills his testimony. walking a razor's edge to avoid his own prison sentence. We must remember this unyielding fact. True redemption is not wished into existence. It is forged the moment you step up to pay the heavy debts you could have easily left behind. The prosecutor delivers a harsh warning. The defense will dissect his life, portraying him as a ruthless criminal to the jury. They will paint him as the ultimate villain. Lucian S. face remains a mask of stone as he replies that he is, in fact, the villain. The prosecutor counters with cold pragmatism, declaring that today, he is simply the weapon needed to slaughter a larger beast. Lucian recognizes the hollow moral compromises the law uses to justify its actions. At 9 a.m, he steps into the firing line of the witness box. Later that night, drowning in the silence of a safe house, he calls home. Vivian's bright voice fills the receiver, excitedly rambling about a perfect spelling test. Her innocence anchors him, pulling him back from the abyss. It teaches us a humbling truth. You do not need a pure soul to do what is right. Sometimes it takes a monster to finally dismantle hell. Listen to the agonizing contrast of this moment. Little Vivian chatters excitedly on the line about sharing cookies and reading a story about a talking pig. It is pure innocence bleeding into a world of violence. Lucian fights the tremor in his throat, desperate for the day he can return. A week feels like an eternity in purgatory. Then Serafina takes the phone, her voice soft but piercing. She asks if he is frightened. He strips away his armor, admitting he is absolutely terrified. She echoes his own dark wisdom back to him, reminding him that fear is the only thing that keeps a soldier sharp. You and I are going to sit with this truth for a moment. Fear is never a weakness, it is the heavy instinct that keeps you breathing. The call ends. Lucian lies on the stiff bed of a federal safe house, staring at the ceiling, tormented by every brutal decision that dragged him to this defining crossroad. Think about the madness of this scenario. Lucian traded 20 years of blood and a vast underground empire just for a taste of immunity. The lesson here is simple. The ultimate victory in life is not holding power. It is finally finding peace. He only wanted his family safe. We fast forward to the courtroom. The room is suffocating, packed with feds and Damien's men glaring daggers. Lucian steps up to the stand, takes the oath, and stares down the monster who tried to bury him. Yet, in that orange jumpsuit, Damien looks pathetic, just a bitter old man. The prosecutor wastes zero time. She walks Lucian through the agonizing history, the Mafia partnership, the brutal betrayal, taking 16 bullets, the custody war, and the kidnapping plot that ignited this dark revenge tour. Lucian answers every question smoothly. Yes, Damien ordered the hit. Yes, the kidnapping was blackmail. The defense attorney steps up, treating him like dirt. She grills him, asking if he is a mobster getting a free pass. He fires back, admitting his terrible choices while insisting he is finally doing what is right. She mocks his noble act and demands to know exactly how many lives he has taken. The judge actually allows it. Lucian could easily lie here, but you and I know the truth about redemption. Owning your dark past strips away its power over you. That is a life lesson you can depend on. He looks at the jury and drops the heaviest truth of the century. He admits he honestly does not know, because he lost count after the first 12, absolute chills. He owns his history completely, admitting he was a monster, but he wants his daughter to know he fought to be a better man. The courtroom goes dead silent. The lawyer pivots, trying to drag Serafina into the mud, calling her an accomplice. Lucian instantly shuts that down. He calls her a hero nurse raising his child, while he ensures Damien pays the ultimate price. For 2 brutal hours, the defense tries to break him, painting him as a liar saving his own skin. But remember who we are dealing with. The real life lesson is that your darkest skills can sometimes be repurposed for the greater good. Lucian spent 20 years in the Mafia, and he knew exactly how to weaponize the raw truth to crush Damien Voss forever. After 2 hours of relentless grilling, this agonizing marathon is over. The judge dismisses him, and Lucian walks past Damien one last time. Damien mutters it is not over, but Lucian coldly fires back that Damien gets a cell, while he gets to go home. He steps into a federal SUV and vanishes. 3 days later, the verdict drops. Guilty on all charges, Damien gets 45 years with 0 parole. The prosecutor warns Lucian to never return to Boston. He immediately books a flight. When he lands, little Vivian tackles him so hard his healing ribs ache, screaming that he actually came back. He smiles, knowing that keeping a promise is far better than just making one. You and I both know this massive life lesson: actions will always speak louder than empty words. And it turns out, that sweet kid learned that golden rule directly from Serafina. He looks at Serafina, who saved his life, standing there with happy tears. He softly tells her the nightmare is done. As they drive home, Vivian talks his ear off about school and her pet crab. The real-life lesson here is that the most ordinary, boring moments are actually the only things worth bleeding for. 5 years later, they are living a quiet dream on the Italian coast. They opened a bakery named Velvet Jasmine, honoring the street where he almost died and the tea she used to heal him. Every morning, this former mafia enforcer wakes up to bake bread. He uses those scarred, dangerous hands to create something beautiful instead of tearing the world apart. Serafina works at a local clinic, getting paid in homemade wine and sweet stories. They finally won the ultimate victory. Picture this heavy contrast. The ghost monarch of Boston, the most terrifying mob boss to ever walk the streets, is now out here baking bread under the Italian sun. Talk about a massive shift. His kid, Vivian, is practicing piano for the locals instead of dodging bullets. One afternoon, Serafina asks if he ever misses ruling that dark underground empire. You know what this former kingpin says? He looks at his kid, looks at the woman who flipped his entire universe upside down, and drops a profound truth. He says he found something way stronger than fear, a chance to just be a regular man. Here is your life lesson. Folks, sometimes the biggest flex in life is not ruling the underworld. It is surviving long enough to sit in the quiet sun and make some carbs. Serafina smiles at that, and the church bells ring like a cinematic masterpiece. After all the endless bloodbaths and insane mafia vendettas they barely survived, they are finally ready to breathe. That night, they relax on the terrace. The kid is inside playing classical music, and the air smells like fresh pastries. Out of nowhere, the ex-mob boss gets soft. He tries to thank Serafina for pulling his bleeding body out of that frozen snowbank back in the day. She shakes her head, telling him he saved himself. Then this ruthless enforcer, a man who spent 40 years communicating purely through violence, pulls her close and simply says he loves her. The life lessons is clear. True strength is having the courage to admit when someone else is the real reason you are still standing. Check out her response, because it is wild. She does not even flinch. She simply tells him she already knows, all because of the careful way he makes her coffee every morning. He treats a cup of dark roast like the Holy Grail. This guy used to orchestrate massive gang hits, but now his vibe is pure domestic acts of service. Suddenly, Vivian crashes the tender moment, begging to go to the water. The three of them hit the cobblestone streets, walking past stone walls and stray cats. Watching this kid chase the waves really leaves a mark on the soul. The life lesson here. You can take the hardest people, put them through absolute hell, and they can still completely turn it around. Sometimes the ultimate revenge against your worst enemies is simply living a totally happy, unbothered life. You and I must appreciate the beautiful irony here. Serafina looks at their setup and casually mentions they did okay. Okay? They absolutely crushed it. They stand by the ocean while their kid collects shells, acting like she did not just survive a vicious underworld war. Those brutal beatdowns and near-death experiences led to this exact second, whereas past is clean. They are not in Boston running illegal empires anymore. They are thriving in a coastal town where nobody has a clue who they really are. A literal mafia don baking bread, and a street nurse doing routine checkups. The lesson is simple. You never have to stay trapped in the toxic environment that created your pain. You always have the power to pack up, cross the ocean, and rewrite your own story. Look at this profound picture. 3 shattered individuals built a family out of the smoking wreckage of their past. Vivian runs back holding a perfect shell, keeping it to remember how flawless this day was. She smiles at these 2 traumatized adults who fought off real-life monsters just to give her a normal childhood. It proves that family is not always blood. Sometimes, it is the loyal crew you assemble while fighting for your life in the trenches. As they walk back home through the twilight, the phantom of the Boston underworld is officially dead. They left all that toxic vendetta baggage behind them. The life lesson here is clear, no matter how deep you are sinking in the darkness. You can always grind your way out and actually learn to embrace a peaceful moment. The daily routine is beautifully locked in. Lucian is up before dawn, kneading bread dough instead of breaking jaws. Serafina patches up regular folks, and the kid complains about math homework. It is wild how normal their lives feel after all that bloodshed. Later, while tucking Vivian into bed, Serafina asks a heavy question. Does he have regrets about walking away from his mafia empire and all that intoxicating power? He goes quiet, thinking about the terror he used to inflict, then looks at his new reality. A safe child and a fiercely loyal partner. He gives a firm answer: 0 regrets. That is the ultimate life lesson right there. Real strength is knowing exactly when to cash out of a rigged game. and putting all your energy into the people who actually have your back. To wrap Saga up, you and I will look at one last quiet moment. Lucian pulls Serafina close, his hand over the 16 bullet scars from the night she stitched him back from death. He whispers a thank you for not letting him bleed out in that snowbank, proving that even the worst monsters can change. She smiles, saying he was human the whole time, he just needed a reminder. They fall asleep to the sound of the ocean, claiming the ultimate victory. The Boston mob wars are dead history. That ruthless crime lord is gone, replaced by a man who just wants to bake bread and protect his family. Listen to me on this one, no matter how many heavy scars you carry from your past battles. You always have the power to step out of the shadows and completely rewrite your own ending.
Vivian is surrounded by wealth, guards, locked rooms, and powerful people. On the outside, she seems protected. But emotionally, she is lonely and afraid. She lives in a mansion, but that mansion feels more like a prison than a home. This is one of the most important educational messages in the story. Children need more than physical safety. They need warmth, attention, and emotional security. Lucian loves his daughter deeply, but at first he believes keeping her alive is enough. Because of his dangerous world, he builds walls around her. He gives her security systems, guards, and safe rooms. But what Vivienne truly needs is someone to listen, to hold her, to make pancakes with her, to read stories, and to let her be a child. Serafina sees this clearly. She notices that Vivienne eats quietly, moves carefully, and behaves like a little ghost in her own home. That observation is powerful. Many children in real life are not neglected because their parents do not love them. Sometimes they are neglected because adults are too busy surviving, working, fighting, or controlling everything. The lesson for parents and educators is clear. Protection without affection is incomplete. A child may be safe from danger, but still wounded by loneliness. Children need routines, laughter, play, comfort, and honest conversations. They need to know they are loved, not only guarded. Serafina brings humanity back into Vivienna's life. She gives the child stories, pancakes, hugs, and promises. These small acts become deeply healing. The story reminds us that childhood should not be stolen by fear. The greatest gift adults can give children is not luxury or control, but a home where they feel safe enough to laugh.